Hello and welcome to episode number 207. This is the Project Management Podcast at pm-podcast.com and I am Cornelius Fichtner. Nice to have you with us. I came across an article titled The Leadership Attitude, written by Elizabeth Herron. I liked what she had to say. In this article, she boiled leadership down to four main pillars: openness, honesty, trust, and integrity. In our interview today, I meet up with her to discuss the article in more detail. We look at the difference between management and leadership, how you can be a manager and leader at the same time, and what these four pillars mean to her. And now, please lead the way by enjoying the interview.
The Project Management Podcast's feature interview. Today with Elizabeth Herron, author, blogger, and speaker.
Hello, Elizabeth. Welcome back to the Project Management Podcast.
Hello, Cornelius. Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, so it's been another year, another PMI Global Congress here in North America.
Yes.
Yeah, I think the only difference is we're sitting right in the thick of things, and the last 2 years that we've done our interview here at the Congress, we were in the exhibition hall, right?
Yes. Don't you think that this building, though, is slightly smaller than the others?
I actually thought it was bigger.
Oh, right. I don't think there's as much space.
Oh, really?
For this kind of thing. Hence, that's why we're in the middle of everything here.
Shows you what kind of an impression. Oh, all right.
Okay. Just
two people do two different opinions of this thing. Wow. Okay. So what's going to happen is, since we're sitting in the middle of things, and since it's about 5 minutes until the presentations will end, in about 5 minutes the background noise will rise terribly, and then we're probably going to have to press the pause button and wait for a few minutes for 3,000 people to walk past us to go and have lunch. Everyone's hungry. So we want to talk about leadership this afternoon, and in one of your articles you started out with the old saying, which is management means doing things right, yet leadership means doing the right things. Now, do you agree with that statement or not?
I do agree with that statement. I think that in terms of being able to manage something, it's much more around the right people doing the right thing, getting the task done, whereas leadership is much more around vision. The difficulty comes, I think, in that as project managers, we end up doing both things. You don't have a project manager and a project leader, and I think the movement recently I've been seeing in the sort of research and what people are writing and the thoughts that are coming out of events like this is that we're moving towards a model of project leadership, but we still need to be able to manage. We still need to be able to get things done. So it's how do you put both of those management and leadership things together so that both those statements are right and at the same time.
One of the gentlemen that we had here on the podcast in the leadership series was Thomas Yulee, who happens to be here as well. And if he walks by right now, I'll grab him. No, he's nowhere to be seen. In his book, Leadership Principles for Project Success, he talks about 5 principles of effective project leadership. Here they are. Build a common vision with shared goals, nurture collaboration with the team, create an environment that promotes performance, cultivate learning, creativity and innovation, and ensure results. Okay, 5 principles. What are your thoughts on these?
I think they are good principles. I've read his book. I've spoken to him in person about his ideas. I've listened to him talk. So there's nothing wrong with those principles of effective project leadership at all. And I think that project managers who are excellent at preparing plans, reporting progress, could learn a lot from adopting those kind of principles around sharing goals with a common vision in mind, making sure that they nurture collaboration within the team. That's the leadership side of getting a project done. So he talks about creating an environment that promotes performance. We need to be thinking about doing that because it's not just all about having a risk log, following a process. If you follow a project management methodology, whichever one your company chooses to use, it doesn't guarantee project success. Whereas if you try to cultivate an environment which where learning is considered good, where there's creativity, where there's innovation, that does move you more in the direction of being able to get the results that you want. But I would say that there is there are other things that project managers should consider when they're looking for models of leadership. And I think project leadership is more than just these 5 points that he's raised there.
Okay, so if it's more than just these 5 points, does it mean that if I want to be a project leader, I adopt these 5 points, I add a few more on top of that, other principles, or is it something else?
Start with adopting those 5 points, but they still read a bit like a process, don't they? Shall I tick it off? I've built a common vision, I've nurtured collaboration, I've created an environment that promotes performance and the others. But I think in my personal experience, leadership is more of an attitude. It's something that you bring to the table as an individual. It's not about checking the box to say you've done some team meetings and made sure everyone is on the same page as you. It's more around how you act, how you behave, and how you instill those behaviours in other people.
So what is your leadership attitude?
My leadership attitude, I suppose, is summed up by 4 things: openness, honesty, trustworthiness, and acting with integrity. Okay,
let's take a look at these 4 all together. What does openness mean? What does being open mean?
Well, I've just been into a presentation where we've talked briefly around the fact that knowledge is not power and that we should share as much as possible. And I think openness really is around that, being able to share as much information as is in your gift to do so. There will be bits of information as a project manager or as a project leader that perhaps you're not able to share, maybe around recruitment decisions or bits of corporate strategy that haven't yet been properly finalised, but they're in the minority. I think they're the majority of things that we know on our projects we can tell other people, and having the openness to have open discussions with people around what's going on and what their role in that is helps them see the bigger picture. So it makes sure that they can see how their contribution makes a difference.
Okay. Second was honesty. So what does being honest mean without mentioning the PMI Code of Ethics?
Hopefully, honesty speaks for itself. It's, don't lie to people. If you act in an honest fashion, people will come to believe what you have to say. And you're not misleading people as well. Does that make sense?
Makes sense. And you didn't mention the PMI Code of Ethics. No. Right.
But there's a good guidance in the PMI Code.
Right, exactly.
If you need some help with what honesty means.
Right. Third, being trustworthy.
For project managers to be trustworthy, I think it comes down to not betraying confidences. So, for example, a lot of us are in mentoring roles or we're coaching people, and there are perhaps conversations that you have with individuals that would be better off if they stayed, or as part of your guidelines for a mentoring involvement, you've said that you will keep those pieces of information private about people's career aspirations, for example. If you then go and tell your friend that over lunch the next day in the canteen, you're not exhibiting trustworthiness. That's just one example.
All right. Fourth of your leadership attitude principles, if you wish, was acting with integrity. Now, how do you explain that? Because I think it has so many facets.
It does. And it involves a lot of things. I suppose integrity can mean different things to different people. But for me, it's about being credible and having consistency in your behaviour. So you do what you say you're going to do and you follow through. So you sort of always act in a way that makes people believe that you'll deliver on your promises.
All right. The 4 pillars of your leadership attitude, therefore, are openness, honesty, trust, and integrity. Is this attitude something that grew from within you, or is this something that you picked up somewhere else, or experience, or?
It's the culture of the place I work at the moment.
Okay.
And so I'm very lucky to have colleagues who've inspired me to work and think in that way.
Wow, okay. And how does the culture do that? I mean, how do they actually talk about these 4 pillars, or is this just something that everybody lives by? Is there a vision statement on the wall?
No, it's not a vision statement on the wall. We do have corporate values,
okay.
But these 4 principles are more part of our departmental way of working. I suppose it's an unspoken attitude that we've got in the department, that we will share information where we can, and we're very open as managers saying we will share with you what we are able to do so, and people know that they're able to ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
So if they ask questions, they'll get an answer. If I'm not able to tell them the answer, I'll tell them that I'm not able to tell them the answer, but more information will be forthcoming or whatever. But those situations are rare, because there's not an awful lot of things that fall into the category of information that other people shouldn't know. I think this attitude of grabbing onto information and not sharing knowledge just because it shows weakness in some way is very outdated.
Okay, I simply have to ask this. You don't have to answer. Since this is an unspoken tenet, how do you know it's there?
What an excellent question. You live by it. When people join the company, they, if they spend any time with me, hopefully I'll have the opportunity to tell them that this is the way I manage. This is the way I will expect other people to work. It's the way I expect myself to work, and it's the values that I hold myself accountable to. So, not everybody can do it all the time. I'm sure I've failed on several occasions at practicing what I preach, but I try, and I think other people try as well. And so it's just applying those traits at different times as appropriate, and acting in certain ways. And I notice it because I talk to people who work in other organisations who tell me that isn't the case there. And I think that's where it becomes really obvious, where I'm talking in a presentation I attended yesterday. People were talking around the fact that they didn't want to share information because they didn't know what other people would do with it. And they were worried that other people would use it in a negative way. Well, they could use it in a negative way, but they could also use it in a positive way to do their job better. And how you communicate that information to them will potentially work out, help them decide whether they want to use it in a negative way or whether they want to use it positively to inform their project and do a better job. But they haven't had the choice, because in that organisation, they don't share information.
You mentioned earlier that there may have been times when you may have not followed these principles. Now, let's talk about times when you actually shouldn't. For instance, I can see this working pretty well in a day-to-day leadership environment. But what about in crisis?
That's a very good point, because day-to-day project leadership can be a bit more hands-off. You can give your team the latitude to do what needs to be done within the guidelines, within the principles that you've set for them. And as a leader, you're sort of steering the ship, but they know where they're heading and they're willing and they're able to help you to get there. But in a crisis, that's not going to work, is it? You can't sit back and just allow them to hopefully work out what the right answer might be, because you might not have the time to do so. So the model of situational leadership is a good one, if you and your listeners have come across that before, where you change your leadership style depending on the situation that you're in and the person that you're leading. So there is a box in the situational leadership model that it talks about directional leadership, and you can, if you're operating in a directional way, you're telling people what to do and you are guiding them in able to get that stuff done. They might not have the skills to just operate in a very open environment because they haven't ever done these tasks before. So there's something to be said there for being a little bit more directive, being a bit more guiding. And in a crisis, you may just have to step in and say, this is what we're going to do to get out of this situation. I'd like you to do X, Y, Z, and it needs to be done in the next half an hour.
All right. And translating for our US listeners, I'd like to be doing X, Y, Z.
Oh, right. Sorry.
Not a problem. Here's, I think, maybe the toughest question of all that I have for you. You alluded to it a bit at the beginning, and that's the blending of all of this, right? How do we blend our leadership attitude with our management style?
Well, I don't think you just switch on being a leader. Right, the first half an hour of the day, I'm going to be a leader, and then I'll go back to managing things. It's, as with all things, I've met project managers who've said they manage projects because they're just very organised. It's a great career fit for them. And I think leadership is the same. Everyone has the capability of being a leader. You just have to merge it into the way in which you normally run your life, run your projects, because nobody will sit there and say, well, in this session I'm doing leadership stuff, and then in the rest of the session I'm going to be doing planning, and that's nothing to do with leadership. So I think it blends quite well, because it isn't something we just switch on.
All right. You said everyone has the capability of being a leader, and I'd like to take that as the basis for our closing question here. And I'm looking for some recommendations here for our listeners. How can our listeners find their leadership style, their leadership attitude? I mean, maybe some people out there will say, oh wow, the 4 items that Elizabeth has talked about, fantastic, these 4 pillars: openness, honesty, trustworthiness, and integrity. But they may not fit everyone. So how do I find my leadership attitude?
I think you probably already have it. You just need to recognise that that's your leadership style. So if you carry out the management of projects without that being aligned to good leadership principles, whether they are Thomas Yuli's, whether they are the points that I've made, whether they're a mixture of both, or some other completely different thing that fits your style. If you're trying to manage without having those things aligned, the project team will realise that there's a disconnect between how you're doing things and the way in which you execute things and the way in which you're presenting the overall vision and goals of the project. So I think the management of your tasks has to be executed with the same leadership approach. So you're probably already doing it, because you're probably already leading a project team through a discussion around organisational objectives, strategy, especially if you work in a programme management environment or in a portfolio office environment. But you could define your own. I think about how you're doing things at home. How do you lead in other environments to a workplace environment? Because chances are you set a strategy, if you like, for yourself and your personal life around building your career goals, where you want to live, what sort of family situation you would like to have or you currently have. And so you've already got the ability to have a long-term visions and long-term goals. So how did you come up with those? And can you apply the same kind of principles that you have in your personal life to your work life? Does that make any sense?
It does. Lovely. Thank you very much for stopping by and talking to us about your 4 pillars of the leadership attitude. Shall we do one of these again the next time that we attend a congress together?
Yes, I'm not sure I'm going to be here next year, but yes,
our listeners are so used to it. Every year they hear us chat and have fun together. All right. Thank you very much, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
And that was my interview with Elizabeth Herrin on the leadership attitude. That's it for today. Thank you very much for listening. As always, you can find us on the web at pm-podcast.com. If you are a project manager who wants to become a PMP, then the easiest way to do so is with our sister podcast, the Project Management Prepcast, and study for the exam by watching over 38 hours of video training from pmprepcast.com. Please send your emails to info@pm-podcast.com, and when you write, please tell me where in the world you are writing from. And finally, we have this. Every project has 2 ends. The one you planned and the one you got. Until next time.